All right, so let me tell you a little bit about E613. E613 is named after Ephesians 6:13, which says, "Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the days of evil come, you'll be able to stand your ground, and having done everything, to stand." It was a message that God has kind of given to me, just that I think I spend too much of my time in my practice trying to make things happen, and that if I will just be in tune with God's will and stand and be ready to go where He wants me to go, that the battle is the Lord's and it is His to win. And so that's why we are named E613. And really feel like in calling that out or living out that calling, living out that name, God has kind of given us three clear objectives. One of those is to maximize kingdom impact. The second is to make disciples. And the third is to see Christ glorified. And I feel like if we can focus on those three key objectives in everything that we do and do it with excellence, then at the end of the day, we will have kind of fulfilled our calling. And so what I want to talk to you a little bit about today is kingdom architecture, the missing piece in planning. When I served families before I knew about this kingdom architecture structure, what I really realized is that I think that we were trying to do things we didn't know how to do. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we talk about families. And so I think that the traditional model of serving families leaves families with a missing piece in their planning. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say that we've got a family's accumulated wealth. And they've accumulated that, and they go out and hire the best professionals that they know who can come in and help them. So what do they get? They hire a CPA, an attorney, a money manager, an insurance agent. Maybe there's other professionals they could be partnering with. Maybe there's a planned giving director at a foundation or some other person like that. But all of these professionals working together. And when these professionals work together, just based on their different skill sets, unfortunately, it does not complete the puzzle. Families are left with four very clear gaps. And what those gaps cause are missed opportunities inside of planning. And so what we've done is we've identified what those four gaps are. The first gap is clarity. And that's really about helping the husband and the wife get clear about what they want to do. See, unfortunately, when each one of the professionals work on their own, unfortunately, they typically provide an answer and they come in and they say, "Hey, how should we do something?" And they offer a product or a service or a strategy. And what we like to say is that's like looking just at the top of an iceberg. And I don't know if you've ever seen the picture of an entire iceberg, but when you look at just the visible portion of an iceberg, what you find is that only 10% of it's visible. The remaining portion is hidden under the water. And I think the same thing can happen when a family only gets asked how to do something, or they ask their professionals how that thing can be done. Behind that sits a question of why. What's important? What's happened in your life that would make accomplishing this objective important? One of the things that we tell families, about getting clarity is, you may ask us to help you do something, but when you do that, we may just try and take a snapshot of where you are. Give me your balance sheet. Give me your current pieces of information, and I'll take a look and I'll tell you how to do it. What that leaves out is the fact that your life is not a snapshot. Your life is a movie. There's things that have happened in your past that affect the way you make decisions today. There are things that are going on today that are on your mind and you're thinking about, and there are ways that you envision the future and think about how you want those things to happen that all shape everything that you're doing, and those shapings become your why. The other piece of clarity is we realize that there are actually two CEOs in every family. So there's a chief executive officer, but there's also a chief emotional officer. And when you're working with the professionals, the CPA, the attorney, maybe the money manager, too often the decisions that get made are based only on the executive officer's level. Well, we'll put this trust together, or we'll just file this tax return, or we'll make this investment. And all we're thinking about is the executive side of those decisions without involving the chief emotional officer and their input on what's important. And so what I want to unpack a little bit is the ways that those two individuals see this inside the family dynamic. So let's look at this from an ideal of life impact and inheritance. There are actually three forms of legacy capital that decisions are being made around. The first one is financial capital. This is the money and material assets. And this is where that chief executive officer, this is where it's easy for him to step in and make decisions. Unfortunately, if all that you focus on is the financial capital, one, you don't have the clarity. But the second thing is you leave out the input of the chief emotional officer, and you're missing two other important elements of planning. The second being relational capital. And this is, the character qualities for effective social interaction. And what we're talking about is how do we treat each other? How well are we interacting with society? How well are our children or grandchildren maturing? And how do we make sure that we pass on the ability to have good interaction and be a productive citizen inside our world? And then the third component, which I think a lot of families think is really important, is spiritual capital. So how do we apply our Christian values, our Christian faith, to how we live out? And how can we best impart that to our children and our grandchildren as we're working with them? And so these three forms of legacy capital each are important components. And I love the way that Ron Blue says this. He says, money is a tool to build spiritual and relational capital into your children and grandchildren. What is left is financial capital. God forbid we leave financial capital apart from relational and spiritual capital. Money will never give wisdom, but wisdom may turn into money. And from a traditional planning standpoint, most of the focus, again, is just on that financial capital. It's not helping both the CEOs engage the relational and spiritual capital in addition to the financial capital. And I agree with Ron Blue. This is probably the most important is the relational and spiritual, and the financial is kind of the next piece. The other thing that happens is, it's the work that gets done needs to be done from a standpoint of wealth transfer, especially when we're thinking about inheritance. But too often, it's simply just the chief executive officer and a transaction decision that's being made, and it's more focused on estate planning. But what does that difference look like? Well, wealth transfer considers the impact on the recipients as the highest priority. Again, how's this not only going to financially impact them, relationally impact them, and spiritually impact them? That is the focus of wealth transfer. Whereas if all you're thinking about is estate planning, then you're just considering the impact on the donor and the estate. Maybe what's the tax minimization, or how is this going to allow you to pass this on to your heirs without having to pay gift taxes, but it's only thinking about the donor and the estate. Wealth transfer really is focused on implementing plans that can begin now. One of the biases we have inside of that wealth transfer is let's try and get the inheritance to the families, A, when they need it, but B, also so we can watch how they steward and manage it. While as estate planning is focused on implementing plans that begin at death. Wealth transfer wants family input now and professional advisors later. We want to know what the family thinks about the decisions that are going to be made and how those might impact them. Whereas estate planning is all focused on getting engaged with the professionals and thinking about the impact on the family later. In wealth transfer, we're focused on making good stewardship decisions, making sure that the knowledge of how to steward and manage those assets is passed on, while estate planning is primarily focused just on making tax-efficient decisions. Wealth transfer makes every effort to transfer assets strategically, while estate planning retains control as long as possible, and oftentimes might even be beyond the grave of maintaining that control. So you can really see how when you're engaging both parties and helping them get clarity, that becomes an important element that often is left behind. The next that we find is a missing element is the element of collaboration. See, as much as they try, oftentimes the attorney and CPA are not talking to each other, the money manager, the insurance agent. You never have all four, or again, if there's other professionals, five. All the advisors are not working together for the best benefit of the family, which leaves the family up to having to do that. I can't tell you how many families we've worked with that it's the first time the attorney's ever seen the detailed balance sheet, or the first time that the CPA has ever seen all the detailed legal documents. And so in trying and missing that opportunity for collaboration, there's missed planning opportunities. The other piece that's really missing is coordination with a biblical worldview. We work with primarily Christian families, and when they're going through and having their planning done, is the advice that they're getting coming from a biblical worldview? And the second part of that is they have to ask the question, is that biblical worldview actually being implored, even if their advisors are believers? Let me explain what I mean. Just because someone goes to church on Sunday doesn't mean that those beliefs are carrying over into the way that they practice their business Monday through Friday. I myself found that I was guilty of that I was allowing the world to kind of come into the way that I was doing my business because I wasn't actively applying a biblical worldview to what I was doing. It wasn't until I took the time to actually sit down and reflect on that biblical worldview that I saw the difference. And so what does the difference look like? Well, planning with a temporal worldview would say, we made it. It's all ours. Whereas a biblical worldview would say, God owns everything, and we just want to know what he wants us to do with what he has entrusted to us. Can you see how you would come up with different answers to how you might plan based on which question or which belief system you're coming from? A temporal worldview says it's more blessed to keep than to give. The biblical worldview says it's more blessed to give than to receive. The decisions that you make on giving sometimes don't make sense when you're looking at it from a temporal worldview and make complete sense when you're looking at it from a biblical worldview. A temporal worldview says getting rich and having more is our priority, whereas a biblical worldview says that life indeed comes from being generous. A temporal worldview says we're masters of our own fate. A biblical worldview acknowledges that our ability to make wealth comes from God and not solely from our own hard work or intelligence. And stop and think about this for a minute. You probably know people who have worked just as hard as you, or maybe even harder, who haven't achieved the same level of affluence or the same level that you are at right now. Why is that? Well, our ability to make wealth comes from God, and we have to acknowledge his role that he plays in putting us in the position that we're in. A temporal worldview says the more we pass on to our heirs, the better. A biblical worldview says poorly thought out and excessive inheritances can destroy the people we love most. A temporal worldview says building my kingdom is the first priority, whereas a biblical worldview says that the best investment we can make is in the kingdom. And so a biblical worldview, when applied to a planning process, ends up with a lot different answers than a temporal worldview would. And so it's not surprising when a family has a plan that's built from a temporal worldview, and they themselves would probably rather have a biblical worldview, that the plan that they have isn't aligned with what they ultimately want to have happen. The last thing that is the missing piece in the planning process is completion. I can't tell you how many times we've had families come in and they'll make a comment of, well, I've got this trust, but I never funded it. Or I have all these documents that I was supposed to sign, but I never signed them because I didn't understand what they did. And so families, when they don't know what's going to happen, they don't see things through to completion. And so even the best laid plans are not even completed oftentimes. And why is that? Well, because they didn't have clarity. There wasn't collaboration. Whether they knew it or not, there wasn't coordination. So without all of those things, the family doesn't feel comfortable moving on to completion. And so when we can recognize and acknowledge that these gaps exist, then the question becomes, well, how do those gaps get fixed? Because under a traditional planning standpoint, it would say we've got all the planning team members that we need. And what we identified is, no, there's one planning member missing that will help complete the puzzle. And it's that planning member that's the missing piece of the process. See, the family wealth counselor can help families get clarity, collaboration, coordination, and completion. And the role of the family wealth counselor is independent from the attorney, independent from the CPA, independent from the money manager, and independent from the insurance agent. When a family wealth counselor is working in that role, they have to take on that very specific role to serve the family so that all of these areas end up getting filled in and the maximum impact happens for the family. So in working as family wealth counselors, what we then realized is that there's actually kind of a financial architecture system that families fall into. So if you think of building a house, when you look at building a house, what's the most important thing that happens in building a house? Well, I would venture to say that it's putting down a good, solid foundation. See, I don't care if you've got a multi-room mansion or you've got a tiny shack. You wouldn't want to build that home without putting a good, strong foundation first. And that's what we found, is that families need to have a good, strong, solid financial foundation. Those things include cash management, debt management, looking at the risks and protecting their assets. And when a family looks at those particular things, there are some families who are still just at a point in their financial lives where they're trying to manage their cash, their debt, and they're trying to get their hands all around that. And then there are families who've moved beyond that. But what are the ways that we could serve families who are in that foundational area? The next area, again, if we go back to financial architecture and think about building a house, what do you do next? Well, you start to frame out the house. You put in the plumbing, you run the electrical, then you sheetrock, then you put in, you paint, you texture, you texture and then you paint, and then you put in your finishings. But each one of those needs to be done in a very specific order. If you frame the house out and put the sheetrock up before you laid out the electrical or put in the plumbing, you would have a problem. And we found the same thing, and the second area that we really focus on is wealth planning. And we think of that as the building of the house. See, families are might be somewhere along this wealth planning line, but there's things that need to be done in order. And as they look at that, now the family has laid the solid foundation, they can focus on their lifestyle. Or maybe they're looking at retirement, or how are they going to build their investments, or what's the tax structure, or if they own a business, how should they be making those decisions? And each one of these fit together to build a family's independent house and the way that they're going to live in that. The other thing that we find is this is the one area that the majority of families spend their lives doing. And this is where most of life happens, because it's not really quick. It does take longer to get through these phases. And so where can we meet families and help them think through their financial architecture when it comes to wealth planning? And then the third piece really is the fact that once the house is built, what you want to do is you want to live in it. You want to leave a legacy. You want to leave memories for the family that gets to live in that house. Maybe your children are living in that house with you and your grandchildren will come visit, or you're creating new memories that happen inside that house. And it's the exact same thing from a financial architecture standpoint in the legacy planning. So what can we do with strategic charitable giving? What's the impact and the timing of the inheritance we're going to leave? How do we make an impact not only on our children, our grandchildren, but the people we come into interaction with in our community? What's going to happen with our estate if we've got some left over after we're gone? What's going to happen there? And how do we make sure that all the professionals we're working with, especially as this gets to be more complex, how do we make sure that they're all collaborating together? And so in creating this financial architecture system, what we came up with was what we call family wealth blueprinting. The family wealth blueprinting process was designed to help family wealth counselors come in and serve families. So what does it look like? Well, we start with a discovery phase. This is really helping a family figure out where they want to go. We have a blueprint questionnaire, which we will take families through, and this is a time of helping the two CEOs, the chief executive officer and the chief emotional officer, helping them get on the same page regarding what it is God's calling them to do and how they want to do that in speaking their different languages. So what we do is we use that questionnaire and we take the family away we go into a retreat with the family where we can walk them through those objectives. And out of that, or we can walk them through those questions, and out of that, we help them come up with very clear goals and objectives for what they feel like they are being called to. What does this process provide? Well, this is the way that the Family Wealth Counselor helps the families discover their clarity. It's through this process that gap of clarity gets filled in. Then we go through an analysis phase, helping the family figure out where they are now. That's where we gather and review all the legal and financial documents. One of the things I think I've been surprised by the most is families who are in the wealth and legacy area. Oftentimes when you show them the plans that are built, and especially as wealth begins to accumulate, is there's been a hodgepodge of plans that have been put together. And I would imagine that 85 to 90% of the time when we show a family what the plan that they currently have does, that most of them, A, don't think that it doesn't do what they thought it did, and B, that's not what they want it to do. It's a very, very common experience. And then we present that blueprint of the analysis back to the family so that they can see where those gaps are. We're also working with the family's advisors during this point because we want to understand everything that's happening and make sure that everyone sees everything. This is the point of collaboration. And the reason that most families are not satisfied with what they have currently is because they've never had everyone collaborated together as everything was built. The third phase that we go into is our solutions phase. Now we know the goals and objectives that God is calling this family to, and we've taken a look at where they are now. Now, with a biblical worldview, we can offer solutions that will help best get you to where God is calling, get the family to where God is calling them. So our team puts together a rough draft of a wealth blueprint. Our team has over 100 plus years of experience on helping families put together and think out these issues and think out how to strategically put together different strategies to maximize their opportunities. Then we take that and review that with the other advisors, continuing the collaboration that's already happening, and then present that blueprint to the client. So now the Family Wealth Counselor, along with the families, has helped those families coordinate a plan with their biblical worldview. And then from the solutions phase, we move into the implementation phase. This is the part where, as Family Wealth Counselors, we change from architects into general contractors. And it's our job to help the family see everything through to completion. If there's a money manager who needs to be involved in helping get things done, that can be done there. If the attorney needs to write some documents, if the tax returns need to be filed, if an insurance policy needs to be obtained, or there are gifts that need to be made with the giving professional, the Family Wealth Counselor's role is to quarterback and make sure that all of that gets done so that the plan that's been built has been completed. And, life changes and life goes on. So once we've helped the family blueprint through their plan, we also encourage them, and many families do, stay with us for our ongoing services where we can help monitor the plan and make sure that it stays in line as their goals and objectives might change, as life happens, helping them make sure that things continue to happen. For families that have businesses, helping them make sure that the business continuation plan is built, and that if there's a time to transition the business to the next generation or liquidate the business, that's done as efficiently as possible. And then helping families really train up their heirs and coaching them in conversations. Remember, relational and capital and spiritual capital are just as important as the financial capital. And so on an ongoing basis, helping the families think that through. So these are the process that we take people through. What I thought might be interesting for you is to show you a couple of cases that really maximize the opportunity. So these are families who are more on the legacy side of the planning. These are real families that we have served. We've changed their names to protect the innocent. These pictures are just taken randomly from the internet. But Every family can be served through this family wealth blueprinting process, and they can realize a lot of benefit. But it's a lot of fun to see as families move into legacy. The real key opportunities is they have more opportunity to do things to impact the kingdom. I thought it'd be fun to kind of take you through one of those. So this is Jim and Gina Combs. So I thought I'd let you first kind of see the current plan that they started with. They're worth about $7.3 million. So this is not a family that had an estate tax problem. And they were doing a good amount of giving. If you look at this over their lifetime, they were going to give about $1.6 million away. And from a viewpoint of most people, when they think about charitable giving, a family is giving $1.6 million during their lifetime. That's a very, very generous family. And so this was the current plan that they had. Again, no current estate tax liability. But we sat down with them and we helped them get really clear on what it was that God was calling them to. And if you look at this plan, I think it becomes interesting because this is a very typical plan for a lot of families. I think one of the interesting things about our planning process is we have about 4 or 5 templates we use for where families currently are, because without clarity, most families fall into one of those 5 templates. They've got maybe a couple of different trusts or other things like that, but it's pretty easy to typically draw out where a family currently is. But we don't maintain any templates for where the families go in the future, because that's really up to God's guiding on their lives and what he's calling them to. And so after we helped the Combs sit down and get really clear over what it was that God wanted them to do, this was the plan that came out of that. And you say, boy, that seems really confusing. There's a lot of moving parts. We're not going to spend the time with each one of these. If at some point you'd like to see this case and study it a little bit closer, we'd be happy to do that and get you that information. I think the one thing that I would just communicate to you is that this plan was built because the family was really clear on what it is that they wanted to do. And when they got clear on what it is they wanted to do, then this plan helped them accomplish all the goals that needed to be done out of that clarity. So the only reason each one of these strategies are listed here is because the family said they wanted to do something very specific, and each one of these strategies accomplishes that. One of the neat things in here, though, is looking just down at the family foundation and the lifetime and giving that's going to be done after their lifetime. This family went up to $30 million in giving. So what changed for the family here? Well, their income actually increased over their lifetime. They made more income under the new plan than they made under the old plan. Their giving to their kids went down a little bit. And from a numbers standpoint, you'd say, yeah, I know it does go down. What's different is they built a plan in here to give a portion of this inheritance to their children while they were still alive, and then the remainder after they passed away. And when you look at it from that standpoint, they are going to be there to help their children steward a portion of that inheritance, whereas the original plan had all of it going to them after mom and dad passed away. And so although the dollar amount went down, I would actually argue the kids probably end up with more, because from a time value of money standpoint, they receive a portion of that inheritance much earlier. But the biggest excitement was helping this family realize the kingdom impact, to go from $2 million to $30 million in giving during their lifetime, just helping them get clear on what God was calling them to do. The second case is Gary and Leah Garson, and they had even more capacity and more opportunity. They were worth about $18 million. They were going to pay about $2.6 million in estate taxes. And again, just a very, very generous family, giving $4.1 million to the kingdom. But when we helped them get clear, when we helped their advisors collaborate together, when we brought a biblical worldview and helped them complete it, the opportunities became exponential beyond that. So again, I'm not going to walk through all the details of this case. Again, these tools were each put in here because they were specific to the family and their particular need. But what was the outcome? Again, we helped the family increase their income. The inheritance, although it went down, this family's inheritance, the majority of the inheritance in this case, went to the kids during their lifetime. So although it went down slightly, most of it was going to them while they were still alive, while as the original plan, again, only gave the assets to them after mom and dad passed away. So again, from a time value of money, the kids were much better off, and mom and dad were here to help their kids walk through and manage that inheritance and see what they did with it. But we take a family, very generous family, going from $4 million in giving up to $20 million in giving, a 5-time multiple of lifetime and after they passed away giving. Just what an incredible blessing it was for this family. And that's why the kingdom architecture concept and bringing in the missing piece is so important for these families. And that's what we're on a job to do, is to help not only be better family wealth counselors, but help to train other family wealth counselors who can come and join us in the journey of helping families through this family wealth architecture system, helping them blueprint and maximize their kingdom opportunity. God has called us to make disciples, maximize kingdom impact, and see Christ glorified. And simply what we're looking for is for other people who want to come on that journey along with us.